Hi Warriors, this is Unit 9, Lesson 7, Personality Disorders. Before I get to that, let's review what types of schizophrenia do you believe is the worst and why. I'm going to leave that question right here for now, but I'm not so sure that I'm going to make that one of your bell ringers because I don't necessarily like that question. Any kind of schizophrenia, be it paranoid, catatonic, disorganized, is going to be life-altering. You be the judge. Do you believe one is more worse? The worst one of them all? Let's talk about personality disorders. Now, how do they differ from ordinary psychological disorders? We'll get to that. Here we're going to explain the features of personality disorders and the characteristics of antisocial. Please understand that being antisocial doesn't mean that you don't want to talk to people. That is being asocial. So let's get into why I say that. So personality disorders in the DSM-5 include many different types. And so you can see listed there on the right the sorts like paranoid, schizoid, schizotypal, antisocial, borderline, histrionic, narcissistic, avoidant, dependent, and obsessive compulsive. Yes, obsessive compulsive disorder can become a personality disorder, but what is a personality disorder? I should cover patterns of inflexible traits that disrupt social life or work and distress the individual. The personality trait is what you got to focus on here. It's a pattern of inflexibility. So this means that it doesn't change. If it is a personality disorder, it is ingrained in a person themselves. So we'll look more in depth at these four types: paranoid, schizoid, antisocial, and avoidant. All right, so paranoid personality disorder is a general distrust and suspiciousness of others, doubts everyone, don't confide in others, holds grudges, and it's going to show in who the person is, an enduring trait that persists over their lifetime. Next is schizoid. So this is a lack of interest in relationships with others, people, and lack normal emotional responses. So when we discussed the types of, these are your emotional disorder ones. Schizoid personality disorder may react not at all, with no emotion, is deviant, distressful, dysfunctional. Antisocial is what we think of when I don't feel like talking to somebody, but that's not what it is when it comes to antisocial personality disorder. These are your formerly known as psychopaths and sociopaths. So these folks have persistent antisocial patterns of disregard for and violation of the rights of others. That's what makes them antisocial or unable to function in society. They don't feel any guilt, they don't feel remorse, they continue despite punishment and social rejection. So if they get arrested and put behind bars, they still don't know, what did they do wrong, what they did was not wrong, or maybe they even acknowledge what they did was wrong, but they don't feel any guilt about it. They don't feel bad about it. What you might see the typical person suffering from antisocial personality disorder, they may violate some of these 1 through 7 things. So failure to conform to social norms. They are not going to live within the confines of the rules of our ordinary society. They may act deceitfully. So they're lying all over the place. Impulsivity, failure to plan ahead. That's that prefrontal cortex where I learn the difference between right and wrong. Doesn't always develop with a person with antisocial personality disorder. Irritability and aggressiveness. Reckless disregard for the safety of self and others. So they might act impulsively and hurt themselves. Irresponsibility and lack of remorse. Examples include this guy who, if you watch Netflix, if you've been on Netflix, you can see tons of things about Ted Bundy, who was a person who acted without remorse, acted without guilt, and ultimately was punished for that. So the next clip's going to be a story about his life and his adventures on death row. So I'm going to click it. We'll watch it, of course, in class. An avoidant personality disorder are people want relationships. They want to have relationships with others, but they're afraid because they're afraid they're going to say something stupid, something silly. They're going to get judged, and therefore they just kind of withdraw from people. So close relationships really aren't a reality for this avoidant personality. And so that's a rundown of avoidant personality. And furthermore, qualifiers include at least 4 of these following. So if you have avoidant personality, this is in the DSM-5, this is what's going to happen. You avoid activities. I'm not going to read all these to you because you are capable of reading, but they're If you meet 4 of these criterion, then you may have an avoidant personality disorder. Not you in particular, the person that's being consulted. All right, so what causes personality disorders? Well, personality disorders to me are the Mac Daddy of them all. Like, this is the big fish. Reason for that is because there's no going back. Like, a personality disorder, if you have one, it's there to stay. You can, do cognitive behavioral therapy to try to remedy some of these situations. But once it's within you, it's really difficult to shake. Psychodynamic theory would explain that no development of a conscience or superego. So nobody taught this child when they were young, according to psychodynamics, Sigmund Freud's theories. Nobody taught that kid when they were young the difference between right and wrong, or they were they were very harshly punished, and that causes the child to maybe not necessarily know what they did wrong, they just know that they got punished. And so there's no remorse, there's no guilt. They just know that the next time they better do it more efficiently so that they don't get caught. So the parent, the adult in the child's life might be very rigorous and demanding, and therefore the child has no feelings about situations at all. Is a popular theory for some of your serial killers that maybe the adults in their lives were unresponsive, and so that causes that child to grow up without any guidance. That's why they don't develop any conscience. Now, learning theorists here, children are reinforced for bad behavior rather than for good behavior. And so the learning theorists, social learning, might say that they're getting rewards for things that they've done that are bad rather than for good. It might also be a case of that's the only attention they get. So when they act out, finally, a parent and adult in their life say, yes, I notice you now because you've been bad. Biology does show that there's a link between relatives with the disorders, even with adopted subjects. So if the person has been adopted and grows up in a different home, they still generally have the same personality traits as their biological families. So there are genetic traces to describe personality disorders, which is interesting to me too, because of social learning, like a nature and a nurture side of things. If you're being raised by a narcissist, it's easy to pick up on narcissist feelings. It's also very easy to maybe develop the anxiety disorders that we've talked about earlier, because you're constantly on pins and needles waiting to make the person, the adult in the life happy, and that's your only choice when you're growing up in that sort of environment. More to come in videos about personality disorders. So consider a one question review. What's the major difference between some personality disorders and psychological disorders that they are similar to? So in the case of obsessive compulsive disorder, if it is just in the opening stages of anxiety disorder, it is treatable. You can treat it with drugs. You can treat it with behavior techniques. When it becomes a personality disorder, it's persistent. It is enduring traits that are a part of our personality. So it would be impossible for somebody, well, I don't want to say impossible because that drastically limits the variations, but it would be very difficult for the person who's the narcissist to stop thinking about themselves so much.